sent him the link.
And I tried to call your home phone number, but apparently it's a different one now.
Oh my God. Okay. So we need to update. We need to update for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We're so thrilled to have you here, man.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
And it looks like we are absolutely live. That's what
Right.
It feels like from my stage management. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the very first, our inaugural Salon Series event for the San Diego School of Creative and Performing Arts. And before we get started, I wanted to say a huge thank you to our friends of SCPA, our foundation at SCPA, who does all the fundraising to make things that we do at our public arts school possible for our students, our families, our staff, and our teachers. So thank you, friends of SCPA. I could not think of this individual. Let me say this again. This individual is the best first guest I could have possibly wished for as we began looking at crafting this Salon series. He originated the role of the Grinch here in San Diego. He originated the role of the Green Goblin. And he originated the role of Hades, for which he was nominated for a Tony Award, for the Tony Award-winning Hadestown production. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the amazing Mr. Patrick Page. Patrick,
hey,
welcome.
Everybody. Thank you for having me.
Patrick, I want to get started here, and I want to kind of dive into some things that I think the students are going to find really, really significant and fascinating about your journey. Okay. First and foremost, I learned this about you many, many, many years ago when we were working together. And it was one of the things that I think really pierced my heart in the most beautiful way. And it came during a production photo shoot when we were doing Macbeth together. It was the first time that I had done it. And you were sharing with the team that was doing the photo shoot that you were recreating some of the iconic pictures that you had seen of your father when he had to take the role. And I just want our families to know, and I would love to learn a little bit more myself, what was it like growing up as a prodigy in a household of amazing artists?
Well, my dad, I'm looking for that picture right now. I want to show it to people, and I think I have it here. So it won't be great quality, of course, but I want to show the picture that you're talking about. My dad was an actor and an acting teacher. And when I was a little boy, he spent his summers in Ashland, Oregon. So that's where I first fell in love with Shakespeare and with theater in general. Let's see. Oh, I want to find this for you so badly. Anyway, I'll keep talking while I'm finding it. So, yeah, that was my journey. Was so like I'll find it later. Was like watching the adults up on the stage, up there in the golden light. My dad was playing in the first season I was there when I was a toddler. He was playing Orsino in Twelfth Night, and he was playing Antonio in The Merchant of Venice. And of course, I don't really remember all of this. I have images, and especially smells and kind of sensations, kinesthetic sensations of like cool, summer air up there in the Siskiyous. But the first lines in both of those plays, he had them on what's called the inner above, that balcony where Romeo and Juliet would have their scenes, And the line for Antonio is, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad." And for Orsino, it is, "If music be the food of love, play on." And I know that I fell in love with language, with those sounds, with those words. I think children fall in love with sounds before they understand the meaning of things. That's why Dr. Seuss's stories are so popular with children, the way the words knock up against each other, and it doesn't even matter what you're talking about, really. It's just the way the words as toys. And so I fell in love with sound and with the idea of play, of being up on the stage. And it, of course, looked like the adults were having much more fun up there than we were having down in the chairs. So that was my experience. And then as I told my parents that I wanted to do that, I said, I want to do that. And I pointed to the stage. But at the moment I pointed to the stage, the green show was going on. There was dancing. So they put me in dance classes, which was more discipline than I wanted. And so they put me in a ballet class, and I did a little ballet, Peter and the Wolf, with my younger brother. We played the Hunters. And then later on, when there was an opportunity for a child to be in a show, they would put me in a show. And so I started doing little plays in my basement before I did any plays with adults. And I would just put on these plays in the basement for my friends, or really for my family. And then after that, slowly there'd be maybe a children's role. I remember they did Rip Van Winkle at the college, and I played the little boy in that. And then they did Music Man, and I played the little boy in that, and went from there.
Did you find yourself connecting physically to the work at a young age?
Physically, in what way?
Facility. Did you feel your posture changing? Did you feel your ability to innately adapt to characterization or creating a character? Did you feel any of those things?
Yeah, I used to listen to, I've always had trouble sleeping. And so my dad would put on records for me to listen to. And rather than listening to music most of the time, I listened to plays. And we had LPs of all these different plays. So, for example, I would listen to Olivier. We had an LP of Olivier's Richard III.
Oh, how amazing.
I think I always fell asleep before the children got murdered in the tower. But, that was my fun, that sort of thing. And so it never seemed, and I just remember that, that kind of staccato delivery that Olivier had at the beginning.
Right.
Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. And so and then John Gielgud was the absolute opposite of that. He was playing Clarence. Olivier was all consonants. And Gielgud was all vowels. Oh, I've spent a miserable night. And so I kind of put the two of those together, I think, and made up my own way of speaking verse.
Oh, that's actually quite genius. I want to talk a little bit more about that later in the conversation. I do want to move on to something that I think affects a lot of our students. So many of our kids, they audition to come to our program, and they begin to work sequentially through their training, through their program, becoming pre-conservatory ready or pre-collegiate ready, audition ready for the next level, the post-secondary level. And so many questions for parents and students are, what am I supposed to expect? What is it that I'm looking for? What am I trying to attain? What are my goals for post-secondary? So I want to ask you, did you know what kind of experience that you wanted to have when it came to your college and conservatory experience?
I didn't. I came from a little town of 3,000 people in Oregon, little rural community. And although my father taught theater, I was still very very green. All of us were. And, but my mom had a connection with Allen Hancock College, where PCTA Theater Fest was. And so I was able to get in there. And, really, what we did in those days was they had an equity company, and we did learn a few. We had classes, but mostly we watched the equity actors work, and which is the best way to learn anything. It's how you learn to walk. It's how you learn to talk. You watch people and know how to do it. And so I would stand in the vomitorium in that. It's a 3/4 stage, and so there's these things called voms where you can. And I could stand down there and watch Byron Jennings and Mark Harlick and Michael Winters acting. And so I did. And that was sort of how I learned. And then that was sort of a preparation for us to then audition to go to what was in those days called the League training programs. And the League was, I think, about 10 schools in those days. And the top was always Juilliard. And then there was Yale and ACT and so on. Many of the schools have stayed the top schools over the years. But the schools that I really wanted to get into, I didn't get into. And the ones that I did get into, I wasn't as keen on. I got into the professional theater training program at the University of Washington, but I thought, if I'm not going to go to Juilliard, I think I'd rather just study English lit. So I went to Whitman College and decided to get a liberal arts education. And for me, that was the best decision I could have made, because I don't think I was really ready for 4 years in a conservatory at Juilliard or someplace studying acting. I needed to really learn how to think. I needed to learn how to write. I needed to learn how to read a play, how to understand a play. So I studied Shakespeare and Yeats and Blake, uh, and that was great uh, for me. For me, that was the way to go. And during that period of time, I auditioned for the Utah Shakespeare Festival while I was at Whitman College. They were auditioning the students at the University of Washington. It's a long story how I ended up auditioning with them, but I did, and I was able then to join that company, and that's kind of how I began my career.
You know, you touched upon some things that I think are so important, key, and valuable. Learning how to think, learning how to read, learning how to write, learning how to comprehend. So significant. You've made that a huge part of your teaching practice as well. Um, I'm kind of veering from our questions here, but you've just piqued my interest on something, and it's something that is also part of an initiative for us at SCPA, and our students hear this every day. Could you elaborate just for a little bit about the value of those components?
Well, look, what I can tell you is that the actors that I admire are, I always wanted to be a classical actor. I always wanted to be involved with great material, a great playwright. And for me, that was Shakespeare, but also playwrights like Shaw, Ibsen, Chekhov. And in order to do that, the actors who do that, they're smart people. You need to be able to read the play, understand the play, serve the play. And that tradition is more in the United Kingdom in their school system than it is in ours. And so I really needed to, I kind of took that on. And for me, that was the right way to go. And it's helped me in all aspects of my life, being able to communicate, being able to express myself, being able to write, being able to see a fallacy, to recognize a fallacy when someone is being incoherent, to not be taken in by sophistry when someone is being purposefully deceptive with language. So, I think a liberal arts education, whether it's done in secondary school or whether it's done, after high school, for me has been a huge part of my development as an artist in general.
That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Hey, listen, Bricia, Kara, Roxy, Katie, they're all out there. Mr. Pidgeot, would love for you to just say hello to them before I move on to our next question.
Hello, how are you?
I just wanted to acknowledge you folks that are out there in the chat and just let you know that we're watching and we're paying attention. So thank you guys, and thank you all for being here this evening.
Yeah,
Mr.
really,
Page,
thank you for being here.
Oh, yeah, thank you, sir. Patrick, when it comes to your influences, are there 1, 2, 3, 5 folks that you feel have played a significant role in your journey?
Well, first was my dad. I mean, because he put me in shows and he expected a very high standard of performance from me. He took it very seriously as an art form. So, for example, when I was in a play, it was understood that you wouldn't eat at least 3 hours before a performance, that you needed to be ready to go on, that you needed to be rested, that you knew all your lines at early rehearsals, if not before the first rehearsal, that that you wrote your blocking down in those days. That that was how you did it. The director blocked things in advance, and then you came in and you wrote it down. People work less like that than they used to, but that was the way we did it in those days. And so all of those kind of and just learning the real basic stuff. What's upstage? What's downstage? What's the setup line for a laugh line, and how do you set up a laugh? The real technical stuff. I didn't really learn to act in terms of human behavior, in terms of really learning what acting was until after I graduated from high school. So then the next person who would be instrumental was a man named Donovan Marley, who ran PCPA Theater Fest. And he was the one who taught me that acting was the pursuing of objectives by the actor in real time and real space, with real actions that were really performed against real obstacles and under an imaginary circumstance. So I began to learn what acting was. Before that, I had all of the kind of some of the craft, upstage, downstage. How do you share with an audience? How silly things that you would learn about, like not picking the drink up with your upstage hand. I mean, with your downstage hand, picking it up with your upstage hand so the audience can see you, being available to the audience. Those were things my dad taught me. And then Donovan began to teach me how to act beyond that. And then I went to Whitman College, where there was this extraordinary man named Jack Fryman, whose main characteristic was unbridled energy. We did 14 full-length plays a year on the main stage. And he felt there was nothing we couldn't do. In my senior year, I played King Lear. Wow. We did the entirety, all 8.5 hours of Nicholas Nickleby. He didn't set any, there was nothing where he said, you know what, college students can't do that. So that was amazing. So while I was studying, history and literature, I was still able to be in plays. And then, always growing up, my idol, because he was my dad's idol, frankly, was Laurence Olivier. And I think what I took away from Olivier was the notion of being fully a character actor, in the sense that I wanted each of my characters to be completely distinct from every other character, physically, vocally, rhythmically, and in how they looked. I always had this childish kind of idea that the audience would, when I was doing repertory theater, which was the first kind of at least 5, almost 10 years of my career, repertory being where you played different roles on different nights, the audience wouldn't recognize me from one night to the next, that I'd play Richard III one night, and then I'd play Leonato in Much Ado About Nothing, and that the audience would have to go through their program to see if it was the same actor. That was always kind of my fun little goal.
Right.
So Olivier was, and then when I moved to New York, I had read a lot of plays and books by a British director, actor named Stephen Burkoff, and an extraordinary person who taught me the potential of theater physically. And he kind of took me under his wing. And then years later, Frank Langella kind of took me under his wing. And so those were my mentors, probably Stephen and Frank.
That's incredible. Connecting a lot of this and a lot of that journey. We just had a question pop up from one of our parents. And she was saying that it would be helpful to hear about Mr. Page's timeline in terms of how long it took him to sort of make it. And Jenna, I'm going to respond to this, and I'm going to let Mr. Page respond. I first met Patrick in 1997, 1998, I believe it was, when we did Shakespeare's Sedona. And at that time, Mr. Page was already known for having appeared regionally, but also appearing on Broadway. Since that time, Patrick, your career has absolutely exploded. So it's a fascinating question for an incredible journey that didn't happen overnight, seemingly, right? I mean,
Not at all. No, no. What happened was, I always had the idea that, look, because I didn't go to a professional training program, I knew that I was going to have to learn on the boards. And I felt the best way to do that was to play the best possible roles I could. So the first 10 years of I'll tell you, each time that I would go through something, I had to break down the door. So I remember seeing this ad that went up on the call board at Whitman College, and it said that they were looking that the Utah Shakespeare Festival was hiring, and it had a beautiful picture of their outdoor theater, which is remarkable, and a couple of actors that I had seen on stage at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival that I admired a lot who had worked there. So I thought, well, this must be the real deal. This place must be real. So I went to Jack Fryman and I said, do you think that I could audition for this place, this Utah Shakespeare Festival? And Jack said, no, we put that up because they're looking for technicians, but they hire all their actors from the league schools, from Juilliard and University of Washington and so on. Well, as I mentioned, I hadn't got into Juilliard, but I had got into the University of Washington, and I had turned them down in order to go to Whitman. And they weren't used to that. And because I remember the man Bob Hobbs saying, look, I've been turned down for people to go to Juilliard or Yale or NYU, but I've never been turned down for somebody to go to Whitman College. And I was like, well, you know, I changed my mind. I want to study English Lit. Well, anyway, when I found out that I couldn't audition, but there was going to be an audition at the University of Washington, either out of arrogance or stupidity, and I honestly can't remember which, I called Bob Hobbs, the chair of the department at University of Washington, and said, it's a 5-hour drive from Walla Walla to Seattle. And I said, if I come on the day of the audition, since I got into your program and I'm clearly talented enough, could I audition with your students? And I think he was so thrown by the question that he didn't just say no. He said, well, we won't have time for that. And I said, well, okay, but if there was time and I came, could I audition? And he said, well, there won't be time, so don't come. And I said, okay, I get what you're saying entirely. But if I came and there was time, could I audition? And anyway, he didn't dissuade me. So on the day I get up, and I almost back out. I have to get up at like 3 a.m. in order to do this. And it's fog in Walla Walla. And I look out and I think I'm not going to go out. And it was January. And I think it might have even been snowing a bit, but there was certainly snow on the ground. And I was like, no, I'm going to go back to sleep. But then I remembered I had bought a ticket for the Misanthrope at Seattle Rep, starring Danny Davis and Kate Mulgrew. And I was like, no, I've got this ticket. I've got to go. So I dragged myself out of bed. I got in the car. I drove 5 hours. Nobody knew. It was a Sunday, and nobody knew on the University of Washington campus what I was talking about when I said the PTTP. Nobody knew. But finally I found this place. It was a little concrete shed. And there was a girl there sitting at the desk, and the students were going in to audition. And I said, I'm Patrick Page and I'm here to audition. And they were like, what? No, you're not one of our students. And I'm like, well, Hobbs said that I could audition. I don't know what I said. I mean, it's long ago, but somehow they told me I couldn't, but I could sit out on the stoop. So I sat out on the stoop, and the casting director eventually, when he was done, came out. He was a man named Sanford Robbins. And I kind of went like this, and he said, are you auditioning? And they said, no, he's not with us. And he said, and I said, I'd like to audition. And he said, okay, well, come on in. And the person who was there said, absolutely not, Sandy, you're going to miss their plane. And I remember this part vividly because Sandy and I have talked about it since. He said, there'll be another plane. And we went in and I auditioned, and I did Salieri from Amadeus. I was 22 years old doing Salieri from Amadeus and Hamlet. And somehow he saw something in me, and long story short, I went to Cedar City as an actor, and I stayed there for 6 years in the summers. And I played Richard III, Macbeth, Iago, Brutus, Jaques, Don Armado. So that was how I kind of broke through. And I frequently tell people, you know, you're going to have to break down some doors, but when you do, make sure you're ready to go through that door. Otherwise,
That's
you're going
right.
to make a complete fool of yourself. And then from there, I met a director there, Libby Apple, who brought me to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Love Libby Apple.
And then from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, we had a little program there where we brought directors from around the country of other regional theaters. And then I went from Oregon to Cincinnati Playhouse, Kansas City Rep, ACT in Seattle, Indiana Rep, and so on, Pioneer Theater Company, et cetera, et cetera. Somewhere in there, in 1987, I took my equity card, and my career, to directly answer the question, has really broken into 3 decades. The first 10 years was almost entirely regional work at regional not-for-profit theaters, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Utah Shakespeare Festival, Cincinnati Playhouse, Seattle Rep, etc. Then I had moved to New York with a play. I had auditioned for a play. A director had seen me in Seattle and become interested in me and put me in a play called The Kentucky Cycle. And that play moved to New York. So then I moved to New York, and then I was seen by a casting director who wanted to put me in a musical, which was Beauty and the Beast. And so then began the second decade. And in that second decade, I, from about 1995 until about 2005, I essentially, that was when I did Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. I took over for other actors who had originated roles, but I didn't originate the roles myself. I was working on Broadway, but I hadn't originated anything. And then in 2005, I started originating roles. And then that's been until now. And then just now, recently, I'm beginning to move into another decade which I think will be more concentrated in television and film.
I had the honor of meeting you right when you were able to move in and out of the Candle or Scar on Broadway at that time. And it was pretty remarkable as a regional actor, to wrap your head around the complexity behind that. Our students are asking on the chat here, and it's related to what we're talking about right now. So many of them want to know about your musicality, your vocal presence, your ability to dance, all the things that you have been able to put into action in your career.
Well, what I can tell students about that is, don't believe the little voice in your head that tells you you can't, because I was absolutely determined that I couldn't sing, and I certainly couldn't dance. And so I remember when I began doing musicals, it was because this casting director in New York, Jay Binder, I was actually auditioning for the first national company of Angels in America. Oh, wow. And I didn't get the part, and I had auditioned all day long for both Joe and Pryor, because the role they were looking at me for was the understudy and they had to cover both Joe and Pryor. And I didn't get it. I fell apparently right between the two chairs. And but at the end of the day, Jay said, "You're not going to get this, but I lost my reader for the first national tour of Beauty and the Beast tomorrow. Would you like to be the reader?" Now, for those of you who don't know, the reader in an audition is the person who reads the other role opposite the actor who's auditioning. And so I was like, I'm going to get to spend the entire day in the room with Jay Binder, who casts, half of everything in New York. Yes, I want to do this. Plus, I'd never seen a musical theater audition before. So I went to there used to be this thing, which none of your students will have heard of, called the Blockbuster Video Store. And I went to the Blockbuster Video Store, and I rented Beauty and the Beast. And I have a quick memory about things like that, and especially about dialects and things. So I got it pretty fast, and especially the two characters, the clock and the candlestick. I knew that the one was the British major domo, and the other one was the sort of French Pepe Le Pew character, right?
Right.
Maurice Chevalier. So the next day, I'm in there, and first of all, I'm completely blown away by the quality of the auditions, because what I didn't know. Now you have to understand, this was 1995. So it's 25 years ago. And in those days, when you went into audition for something, you really were just showing a stage of your work in a straight play. You weren't expected to come in memorized or with a full performance. Nowadays, you are. Nowadays, if you don't come in with an opening night performance, you might as well stay home. Right. But back then, it was like, so I wasn't, these actors were coming in with the songs, and it was like opening night, every single one of them. And I was blown away. But then they would get to the scenes and they would stumble. And so I was in this scene with this actor who was auditioning for Lumiere, and I was playing the clock. And, it's just a certain timing, Rich. You know exactly what it is. It's like this certain comic timing, and that stuff that I learned from my dad when I was a little boy. How do you set up a joke? How do you land a punchline? And so I was doing that, and I was doing that apparently pretty well. And Jay sent the other actor out of first he said, switch parts. So we switched, and I then played the candle, Lumiere. And he sent the other actor out of the room, and he said, you could play this part. And I was like, no, not me. First of all, I was very snobby about Disney. I did not want to do musicals.
Wow.
And I was like, no. And he goes, come here. He brought me over to the piano. He goes, sing this song. Well, I'd heard it the night before, so I just start, be our guest, put our service to the test. Tie your napkin around your neck, Sherry, and we provide the rest. Right? So I do this thing, and he says, you know what? So I'm going to hire you a coach tonight, because you need to be able to reach this final note. And you come back tomorrow and you do it for the producers. So I go home, I call my agent, I say, you got to get me out of this. You've got to get me out. I do not want to do this. She said, Patrick, just go in. It's not going to hurt you. So I go in. They call me back. I said, please get me out of this. I go in for the final callback, and the final callback looks like The Last Supper, right? There's at least a dozen people sitting behind the table, and they're laughing, and they're having the greatest time. And I come out, and somebody says to me, how did it go? And I say, I think it went too well. And I got the part. And then my agent convinced me to take it. And the little piece of news that I didn't know that I learned was that musicals pay much, much, much better than plays do. Yeah. And once they made me the offer of the money, I'd never heard about that. I never heard of that kind of money before. Because you were not only getting your salary, which was a very good salary, but you were getting per diem as well. So you had $750 in the clear, tax-free, before you even started your paycheck. Right. And this was the golden days of touring, and then we would sit down in every city for at least 3 months. So that's where I met my wife. And that was how I started in musicals. And so then I thought, well, now I better learn how to do this. So I started taking voice lessons on the road. And with dancing, I never got comfortable. I used to go to my understudy and ask him to show me the steps. The poor guy, it must have been so torturous to have to teach the actual actor the steps, since he could do them and I couldn't. And he was very gifted, and later played the part. But then it turns out that in this particular production I'm doing now, or that I was doing until COVID shut it down, the most important moment for my character is a dance. And it's a wordless 4 or 5 minute dance. And so by now I've learned to just quiet the voice in my head that's panicking, but what I do say to the choreographer is what I've said to fight choreographers over the years. You'll understand this because you've seen me fight, which is, I'm slow, but I'll get this. Just be patient with me. Be patient. It's going to take me a while, but I will get it. And when they know that, then they calm down. They don't panic quite so much.
I remember that when you and I were rehearsing our fight scene at the end of Macbeth, and it was teaching me so many different things in that moment. Because I was one of those actors that just wanted to throw myself at whatever it is I was doing. And you had this patience, and you had this very like studied, calculating approach, and actually it all helped pay off for what ultimately you and I created in that moment. So I've always appreciated about that about you, that patience, that discipline. Hey, there's some kids now that are asking some things that I think are really, really relevant. One of them is the currency that we're living in. So many kids right now are losing their passion. They're losing hope. And is there illumination that you can provide that I think transcends advice in terms of what the moment is about, and then holistically how we maintain that fire?
Well, what I would say is you're an artist. If suddenly for whatever reason I couldn't act, like, if the theaters were shut down by a plague or something, I would still be an actor. You don't stop being an actor. So I see the world as an actor sees the world. So, tonight, probably when I go to bed, I'll watch something on Netflix. But as I'm watching it as an actor watches it, right? I'm thinking to myself always, oh, and I can't stop myself. It's not like I'm trying to do it, but I'm watching it going, oh, that's interesting. How did she get to that moment? Was that the first take or the second take? Where was the camera? What was it? Was it the fifth take? Did they shoot her coverage first, or did they shoot the other person first? My brain's going the whole time on the aspects of the craft. So what I would say is, when you're not performing, it doesn't mean you're not an artist anymore. Most of what being an artist is the taking in of stuff. If you're not taking stuff in, you've got nothing to give back out. So Leonard Cohen had a wonderful line about poetry where he said, people would ask him if he called himself a poet, and he'd say, well, that's a verdict. That's not something you call yourself. That's a verdict that someone down the line says he was a poet. And that what poetry is, he said, is the ashes of a life well lived. So the poetry is just the result of the life. And so what I would say is, you're still an artist. Read, listen to music, look at paintings, dream, write down your dreams, meditate. There's so much you can do aside from performing. Now, in addition to that, I sing every day. I get joy from it. I once read that Bernard Shaw said that the way to keep your health was to sing for at least a half an hour every day. And I find that to be true. It opens up my throat, opens up my lungs. I have to breathe deeply. All the kinds of things that keep you healthy, singing fully every day helps you with, and it's joyful. You don't necessarily have to have an audience. The audience will come back. When you're very young, when you're 17, 18, 19, it seems like, you and I are talking about now things that happened over 19 years ago.
Right.
And many of the kids that we're talking to weren't even born yet. And
They weren't even born.
And the thing to remember is, it's a very long game, a very long game. And perseverance is the main thing you need. I've said frequently that if I had a magic wand and I could gift my students with one single quality, it wouldn't be talent, it wouldn't be the ability to sing, it wouldn't be the ability to act, it wouldn't be good looks, it would be the ability to hear the word no innumerable times and to keep going, to not let it discourage you, because it's a long game. And I know so many people that were absolutely as talented as I was, better looking, sang better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for whatever reason, at a certain point, they were just like, you know what? It's too much. It's too much pain. It's too much suffering. It's too many no's. I'm going to do something else. And that's how the herd gets thinned, you know. So I would give people the ability to keep hearing the word no, because you're going to hear it over and over and over again, and to keep getting back up. I remember seeing when Emma Stone won the Oscar
Oh yeah.
for La La Land. She was on CBS Sunday Morning that week, and because she could, she insisted on bringing, I think it was 3 of her girlfriends who she had gone through the whole Hollywood experience with. And she had become famous and they had not. They were all actresses. And they asked these other girls, what was the difference with Emma? Why does she have this statue now? And they said it was because when she heard the word no, it just gave her more fuel. It somehow just made her, it inspired her as opposed to dispiriting her. And so that's what I would say in terms of you're always, if you're an artist, you're always an artist. You don't stop being an artist because you're not painting at that moment. Picasso's still an artist when he's sitting having a cup of tea. He doesn't have to have a brush in his hand to be an artist, you know?
That is absolutely like life advice. I mean, it's not just advice about the industry or about your passion. It's just about life in general. I mean, it's just so poignant and still so refreshing to hear again. I know that our students are appreciating hearing that perspective. Hey, listen, I want to touch briefly upon something that I've always admired about you, and that is the complexity that you bring as the full artist. You are the Shakespearean authority. You are the straight play maestro, but you're also this incredible musical theater talent. And then above and beyond that, which a lot of our young people maybe don't know, you're an acting teacher. You're an acting coach. You have your own small business. You are somebody who is constantly educating yourself as well as those around you. Can you talk a little bit about that whole complexity?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite phrase is a phrase that Yeats put before one of his plays, and he said it's from an old saw, so who knows where it's from or whether Yeats wrote it himself. But the phrase is, in dreams begin responsibilities. You have dreams, and those dreams are you being touched by something divine, something beyond yourself. You can believe in God, not believe in God. You can believe in the collective unconscious, but you're being touched by something invisible. So you are imagining something, an image is coming to you. And when that image comes to you, you move toward the image. You want to bring the image from its invisible hiding place into some kind of corporal reality. And so I believe I have a responsibility to those things I imagine. And I also am, I'm a great believer in the freedoms that we have. I don't take them for granted at all. That I have the freedom to create an acting studio, and that if I believe in absolutely in proactivity, in not waiting around for someone else to offer me a job. From the very beginning of my career, I've done a series of one-man shows. I'm just doing a new one now that I'm really enjoying. But I started with one called Passion Slaves. I've written a number of them over the years, and they're a way of me having work when there is no work. So, for example, there is no work right now, but I just did this show last week in Virginia, and I'll do it in a few weeks in Arizona, and then we'll record it in Washington. And it's part of it is a work ethic. Certainly part of it is a work ethic, but part of it is just needing to make things the way a kid needs to draw with crayons and stick them on the refrigerator, and the fact that we have the freedom to do that, the fact that, for example, YouTube exists, that TikTok exists, that Instagram exists. There are so many opportunities for people to be creative, to make art. You can, with this little thing, you can make a movie. I see something like the Blair Witch Project, and I'm like, that was just an idea. Let's imagine that there's a boogeyman or a boogie woman in the woods, and that we're stuck in the woods, and we got one camera, and that's it. And let's make a movie, And that's how I've spent my life. My brother and I used to go outside every single day, and we'd say, whatever. Today I'm Batman, you're Robin. Go. I tie the blue towel on my neck. He puts the yellow towel on his neck, and we improvise for 8 hours. And I think it's very, very important that children have imaginative play of that kind. And I find sometimes it's more difficult nowadays because the statistics show that actually it is no more dangerous to play outdoors today than it was when we were children. But kids are very often not allowed to play outdoors alone. We used to go out at 8 in the morning and come back at dinner time. And that was just the way it was. And out there, you find your adventures, you find your dragons, and you slay them, And to do it now with the confines of a computer screen, I think can calcify the imagination. So, I was just talking to. So I think maybe some people listen to my podcast. I had Patty Murin, who is a Broadway star, on my podcast the other day, and we were talking about the very first step in any kind of theater, frankly, is finding somebody and saying, let's play. It's just like we did when we were kids. You go out on the playground and you'd find somebody who seemed open to it, and you'd say, you want to play with me? And that's the scary part. The scary part is just saying, you want to play with me. But very few things happen on your own. Even a thing like my one-man shows. I'll go to a director. I went to Darko Trejnik and said, you want to play with me? Or I'll go to a theater owner and said, hey, if I make something, will you put it up? When I was wanting to make this particular show, I wanted to make a show about evil, which interests me a lot. And so I called Brian Vaughan and said, can I come do it during your Shakespeare competition? Now, why did I do that? I did that because I knew that I needed a date certain at which it had to be done, or I wouldn't do it. Because it's hard to do something by yourself. So set a date, find a playmate, and get to work, and if you build it, they will come. I really do believe that. I believe that you attract you have to start things with an idea of what the end product is, but you don't have to know 100%. For example, right now I'm working on a show with Des McAnuff, who is a Broadway director who used to run the La Jolla Playhouse. Right. And we have a subject and we have something that we're doing, but we don't have the form of it yet. We're playing. We're in the sandbox playing. We eventually will have a product that we offer to people. Don't stop yourself because you don't know what it is yet.
That's right. That's right. You actually gave me that advice after I had seen you in Passion Slave, in Sedona. I had gone backstage to talk with you, and you said, Rich, create your own stuff.
Yeah, just make it. Yeah. And I say, like, what I did with all of those shows is like, I've just found a theme. So for example, with the one I have now is called All the Devils Are Here, How Shakespeare Invented the Villain. And I thought it might be interesting to start at the beginning of Shakespeare's career and then to move chronologically through, looking at the villains and to see, did they change? If they changed, how did they change? And what I found is this extraordinary growth from over a period of 20 years about Shakespeare's understanding of why people did terrible things to one another. So the thesis evolved out of a curiosity, right? And the same way with Passion Slaves. I just had a line from Shakespeare, which was that give me that man that is not passion's slave, and I will wear him in my heart's core, in my heart of hearts, as I do thee. The idea being that everyone, the most perfect man, is a slave to some passion, and then just go through the canon and find which speeches I wanted to do that reflected that, you know.
Two more questions and we'll bring it to a close. What's your favorite role that you've played? That's a very popular question in the chat this evening.
Cyrano. The Cyrano de Bergerac, and it's funny why it's such a perfect role. It makes me laugh because it is an absolutely perfectly written part. You get to do, you know, the sword fight from, you know, Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio and Tybalt, but you get to do it while you're composing a ballad. You get to do the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. You get to do the death scene from Antony and Cleopatra. You get to do the battle scene from Henry IV Part 2. I mean, it's everything rolled into one. And the original actor who played it, Constantine Coquelin, was a notorious stage hog. And so what would happen is Rostand, the author, would bring in some marvelous speech, and it would be written for Lebray or De Guiche. And Coquelin would go, that's a marvelous speech, but I think Cyrano should say that. And so everything in the play ends up being about Cyrano. And it's just, and also the other thing about it is Cyrano, even though he suffers greatly, because his ultimate goal is to do things with panache, to do things with honor and elegance, he succeeds in every scene. Even though he fails at getting Roxanne, even though he fails at what appears to be his super objective, he doesn't actually fail. He succeeds in living his life with panache. And it's very fun to play a character who succeeds. Very different, for example, than Macbeth, which is torturous to play because he fails in every scene. Although he succeeds in some actions, he never succeeds in doing what he sets out to do, which is conquering his fear. So Macbeth is very painful to play, whereas and Hamlet is very painful to play, whereas Cyrano is quite joyful to play. You want to celebrate after you've played it. You feel exhausted in the best possible way.
That's phenomenal. I love that description as well, that the role really encompasses just about everything. Hey, listen, last question. I'm going to kind of marry some ideas here together. The question that a lot of the kids are asking right now is, in this currency, in today's world, the world of agents, the world of auditions, the world of next steps, all of those things, how would you characterize that in the way that today you might look back at the 17-year-old Patrick Page and give him some advice about the career pathway today?
Well, what I would say is, and I'm not sure that 17-year-old Patrick ever thought otherwise, but what I would say to people is nobody's against you. You know, when you walk into the room, if you get in the room, they want you to do a good job. There's nobody I hear sometimes actors talking about casting directors or producers in an adversarial way, as if somehow that person is keeping them from their dreams. And that nothing could be further from the truth. The people that I have met in my career, which has been pretty long, they've been good people. They're people who love art. They're people who love theater. They're looking usually for the best person for the role. There are constraints that they have. Sometimes a producer said, I have to have a star. I remember when I was auditioning for The Grinch, and I'd done a couple of workshops and they were successful, but the producers were, they were looking for a star, a name, someone to put butts in the seat. I completely understood. It wasn't anything to do with me that they didn't like me. they had a financial duty to their investors. So I had to make the case to them why I would be the best one to hire, in spite of the fact that I was not perhaps going to bring in as many audience members as, you know, Jerry Seinfeld would, if they could get him, which they couldn't.
Right.
But you know, I mean, I guess that would be the main thing, is that nobody's against you. Nobody's against you in any way. My experience is that people are rooting for you, and that those who aren't, you're just not on their radar. And that's one thing that I frequently say to people is, if you make a connection with anybody, stay on their radar. For example, when I had this show, everything shut down, and I sent off an email to a few people saying, hey, I have this show. So I sent it to Simon Godwin at the Shakespeare Company. Well, as it happens, he was at that very moment looking for a show to open his season. And my show was the answer to his problem. But had I not sent that email, he wouldn't have known that the answer was there. So, you know, stay in touch with people. I remember when we were doing, Rich, when we were doing Midsummer Night's Dream, I couldn't find a bottom. I didn't know who would play bottom. And I was looking all over New York, and I had an equity contract for bottom. Now, the year before, I had directed Ted Barton as Malvolio, but for whatever reason, he didn't spring to my mind. And then I got this postcard. He was in London, and he sent me a postcard just saying hello, not looking for work or anything, just saying hello. I was thinking about you. I was in London. I said hello. And I got that postcard, and I said to Paige, Ted Barton, of course he should play Malvolio. And I called him and offered him the part. But had I not gotten that postcard, he wouldn't have gotten the part.
Wow.
So,
wow.
That, you know.
You know, and I got to tell you, you know, those 2 years together were they're so burned in my memory, so carved out in my heart. That production of Midsummer Night's Dream, where the 9 of us played all 27.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun play.
It was pretty remarkable, man. It was just an incredible journey. Hey, folks that are out there this evening, Mr. Page will be revisiting us on October the 30th, but this will be a closed event. It'll be for the theater department, our actors, our musical theater students, and other invited students will be participating in hearing all about the history about Hadestown. So that's incredibly exciting. I think everybody's looking forward to that. But I want to give Mr. Page the final word this evening. So we're going to close out with Mr. Page just kind of, Patrick, send us off with some words of wisdom, something for us to ruminate on and to continue reflecting about.
My goodness, I wish I could come up with something that was worthy of that. What I will say is this. When you're beginning a career as an actor, you don't know if it's going to work, and you know how much the odds are stacked against you. And I remember the moment I was riding in a car when I sort of thought, oh, I think I might actually be able to do this with my life. I'd been with Utah Shakespeare Festival a couple of years, and they offered me the role of Richard III. And when they offered it, I thought, I think maybe I'll be able to do this. And so I guess what I'm saying is, well, here's the other thing that I want to say. And I would say to 17-year-old Patrick or any of the people out there, be who you are. I think a lot of us spend time trying to figure out what they want, this imaginary they. We now live in a time when there's so much material, so much writing, that there's a role waiting for you that's only yours. There was very little work for Peter Dinklage before Game of Thrones. He had some work. He was a working actor, but he wasn't Peter Dinklage as we know him today. When they did that show, They didn't even audition that part. They knew we have to have that actor, and if we don't have that actor, we're stuck. Laverne Cox in Orange is the New Black. There was no work for a 6'2" transgender Black woman until there was the role. And then she was the only one who could play it. So whatever it is that's odd about you, whatever it is that you're hiding, whatever it is that's unique, that's special, that you think might be, in my case, it was my voice, where for years I thought no one will be able to use this, you know?
Oh, wow.
And then people started writing for it, right? Now, Anais Mitchell didn't write Hades for me, strangely enough. She just wrote a god of the underworld who happened to sing in these subterranean ways. But people do write now for me. And the thing that was odd about me and that I thought was going to keep me from working is very frequently the thing that people want to hire. So what I would say is, like, be yourself, embrace your oddness, embrace your uniqueness, and understand that it's a long, long game. So have a life besides acting. Have a life so that you've got something to give, which goes right back to what we were talking about before. Most of being an artist is ingesting, not performing, not whatever the opposite of ingesting is, exgesting, right? It's most of being an artist is ingesting, taking stuff in. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Patrick, I'm gonna reiterate what so many of the comments here are. You're an absolute inspiration. I am so grateful for you taking the time this evening to come and join us. I think we've all learned a great deal through this evening's presentation, and a chance to have you share with us your personal experience and your expertise and your thoughts. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. Thank you to the Friends of SCPA for underwriting what we're doing here at this time. And I just want to give the hugest shout out to an amazing friend, an amazing artist, and just a truly wonderful gift to us this evening, Mr. Patrick Page. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Richard. It's wonderful to see you again. Can't wait to talk again.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know that, you know, these Zoom things can be quite wearing to sit and listen to. So I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow night when we interview Mr. Carson McCauley.
Wonderful. Good night. Good night.